The following program is to provide entertainment and information. It is not considered to be any legal or investment advice. Good morning, appraisers. Let's talk some real estate. You're listening to the Voice of Appraisal, the #1 appraisal podcast in all of America that always brings you the latest news and information from the front lines of the real estate market, anything from market conditions, appraisal regulations, cryptocurrencies, big bank news. Folks, you have a question, we have all of your answers. We are the one-stop source for all of your real estate appraisal information needs. If you want to be in the know, you have definitely tuned in to the right show. I'm your host, Phil Crawford. Happy to have all of you here with us today. Kevin, how are you, my friend? How are you?
Actually, Phil, I need to use my favorite word today. You know
What's the word of the day, Kevin?
Perchwell.
Perchwell. We are still in perch hell here in Cincinnati, Ohio, as our MLS system is still trying to get back online again. They gave us about another 8 weeks to finish things off. This is just ridiculous. This is ridiculous. The Cincinnati Area Board of Realtors putting a wet blanket on possibly the hottest real estate market in the country today, especially with the rising interest rates. That's the last thing that we needed to have happen here in the big city of Cincinnati. We will go over that later on, Kevin. We will go over that later on because there's more important things going on in the appraisal world today. Do you know what today is, Kevin? Do you know what today is? It is November 1st, 2023, which means it's the 5-year anniversary of Appraiser Fest, Kevin. Appraiser Fest, the #1 appraisal conference ever put on in the history of mankind. It was Appraiser Fest 2018. And everything that we talked about at Appraiser Fest 2018 is happening right now. The way you were supposed to develop your business, the way that things were supposed to roll out, everything that we talked about at Appraiser Fest 18 is happening right now, 5 years later. And these are important topics that we're going to go over today, Kevin. We're going to go over the TIPS program from Fannie Mae. We're going to go over this gigantic, huge show that's going on with the National Association of Realtors and their 2 lawsuits that are going on. Those hearings are taking place. Well, they took place last week by the time the show comes out. So there's a lot of drama there. Bob Goldberg, who is the CEO of the National Association of Realtors, taking it to him on the stand. He's really upset about things. Of course, Bob Goldberg is also the president of some other corporations, which we're going to go over as well, especially when we're talking about Perchwell. We'll get into that a little bit later on. We'll get into it later on.
Isn't that the guy that had his little meltdown?
He had a meltdown. The emotions beyond the emotions that are going on with this whole lawsuit with these class action lawsuits, it's pretty amazing. It really is. We're going to go over that, and then we got to go over the FTC talking about their junk fees and what are junk fees and their attempts to ban more and more junk fees. So we're going to get into some serious topics and some sensitive topics. Here we are 5 years after Appraiser Fest, and on a show like this, we need to bring in a very special guest, almost a co-host in this scenario. We need to bring in the appraiser of champagne wishes and caviar dreams. He has the brain of Albert Einstein. He looks like George Clooney, and he smells like Pierce Brosnan. Kevin, we need to call Jonathan Miller. Jonathan Miller from New York City, where they do use Perchwell every now and then. Of course, they're not using it at the moment right now. But Jonathan Miller, champagne wishes, caviar dreams. Let's give him a call right now.
Hope he answers.
I hope he answers, too, because I can't redo that intro again, Kevin. Let's hope he answers the phone. Is Jonathan Miller there? Where is he?
Hey, Phil.
What's going on, Jonathan? You are now on the show. How are you, my friend?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I just gave you a wonderful intro, and we were talking about this being the 5-year anniversary, NOV 123, the 5-year anniversary of Appraiser Fest. Can you believe it?
It's incredible. Time really flies.
You've been making a lot of headlines lately with all of your news and information that you've been putting out there. Your housing notes has been on fire. Yeah, well, your housing notes has been on fire. And so has Appraiserville, that's for sure. And let's just get right into it. We got a lot of information, a lot of news to go over today. And some of these topics, Jonathan, I can't tackle unless I'm with you, man. I mean, these are some serious things that are going on.
I'll follow your lead.
Okay, Jonathan, well, let's talk about some of the most important topics today. The first topic I want to talk about, something that you covered in Housing Notes, I think it was like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. You talked about Fannie Mae's TIP program, the TIPS program that Fannie Mae has put out. We've also called the TIP program on this show the Fannie Mae Love Letters, and we've had an interview with Danielle Marie Evans from Florida, what was it, like 2 years ago, about
I remember that.
Yeah, her situation with TIPS. What the heck is going on over at Fannie Mae, and what are you hearing from this crazy TIP program?
Yeah, I mean, their email, first of all, is there a joke for TIPS? Like, what does it stand for?
I'm actually looking at that right now. Hold on one second. It says here, well, here, I'm going to read off what Fannie Mae put out. It says here, Fannie Mae occasionally provides tips to state regulatory agencies when we find appraisals with severe deficiencies. Our goal is to give the states actionable information to improve the quality of appraisers and appraisals. How does the process work? Spoiler alert, state tips are never auto-generated and are always required extensive manual research.
They're handmade. I was like asking about the jokes, a joke for tips, because if you think about it, like I just have this image of Fannie Mae sort of going out and just, hey, I got a tip for you.
Yeah,
and it's like they're just, what they're essentially doing is their underwriters are sending out notes to the states, unsigned.
Yes,
meaning they're just anonymous, coming from the agency with criticism.
Yeah.
So essentially what that is doing is the underwriter that's making this decision is absolutely not accountable. And
that's exactly right.
I always thought you were allowed to face your accuser. There was some process. Instead, this is just smearing appraisers' reputation. You can't issue these things. They if you issue them, they need to come from a human being.
Right.
It's not enough to tell us that they're not automated, because certainly that is the impression.
Well, it is.
But
and
that doesn't excuse it. It doesn't excuse it. It's what, think of our world as appraisers. We sign everything, right? I mean, we sign it. It's our name. It's our reputation. And here you have some random person that we have no idea. They may be very qualified, they may not be, but we don't know who they are.
Right.
Are just sending out, and I don't know, are they being incentivized to do this?
Supposedly they are. I think Jeremy Baggett put out in his newsletters that he puts out every Friday that there's sort of a quota system when it comes to the tips, that you got to have a certain amount of tips.
Right. So it's really not about trying to solve a problem.
Right.
In many ways, this sort of dovetails in with, becoming a data collector, that they're trying, they're really, I think it's a world's worst secret that the GSEs, particularly Fannie, really are focused on just automating and getting rid of appraisers as a general sort of observation, at least by their actions, and trying to convince appraisers to become data collection specialists, or whatever the term which is insane.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. When you make a very good point here, when you talk about them trying to get rid of the appraisers or just the traditional appraisal model. When you have a tip, or let's say, for instance, you have an investigation, because what ends up happening is Fannie does send out this form letter to the state board. The state board looks at an unsigned complaint. And by the way, if you go to a lot of the states and a lot of jurisdictions, they say on there that if you're going to file a complaint against an appraiser, it needs to be signed. The regulators aren't even following their own rules, okay? So they get this little quote-unquote letter, this tip in. Now, all of a sudden, this investigation is launched against this appraiser. Once the investigation is launched, if the appraiser goes into any disciplinary action because of it, then all of a sudden, that appraiser can't bring on a trainee. You see, when you have a disciplinary action against you, you can't train somebody else because you've got a disciplinary action. So in other words, this tip becomes what I consider to be a professional vasectomy, Jonathan. It's a professional vasectomy. Fannie Mae wants to cut off your tip. They want to cut it off because they don't want new appraisers being made by the old appraisers and the old batch that are out there today. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I first of all, I'm sort of overwhelmed with the way you're describing this, but I do, the whole concept here. You have this big agency against a single appraiser, and the states, if they go with the word of the institution, you have the little guy. Right. What can they do? They're going to have to go through a battle with the board. I'm not clear in that battle if someone from Fannie Mae then is brought in to represent their position? I'm guessing they don't. It becomes, he said, she said sort of,
but Jonathan,
kind of a thing.
You have to remember, though, that Fannie Mae has responsibilities here. So let's go back to, because this was in the Fannie Mae, what was it, September of 2023 appraisers update, okay? And they talked about their TIP program. And they basically said right here, through this TIP process, we aim to be responsible members of society, helping protect the public trust in giving appraisers and regulators feedback about deficient appraisals impacting the secondary mortgage market. See, these guys are there to make sure that they don't break capitalism again like they did in 2008. This TIP program is going to cause a massive, massive issue when it comes to the E&O insurance policies, and they're not designed to handle all of these TIPs. And there's something else I want to bring up, too, especially when it comes to what Fannie put out. And this is just a quote-unquote coincidence here, Jonathan. It's a massive coincidence here. They put a little PS on here. It says, generally, the number of TIPs that we provide is proportionate to the state population. Ohio, for instance, I wonder where they get Ohio, for instance. I mean, it's just the same thing as Phil Crawford starting an education company called A Noble Education, named after Lori Noble, and all of a sudden Fannie Mae comes out with a podcast called The Noble Appraiser. I wonder how coincidental that is. You know what I'm saying?
I always wondered about
that stuff. I'm like, you guys really don't have that much creativity over there, originality, right? So it says here, Ohio, for instance, is the seventh most populous state in 2022, and also had the seventh largest number of state TIPs that year in 2022 at 46. Now, here's the thing. The Appraisal Subcommittee's appraiser registry currently lists 2,781 active appraisal licenses in Ohio. So that would mean that they only turned in 1.2% of the state's appraisers. What they don't understand is of the 2,781, I don't know, probably only 500 do secondary mortgage work. I would even guess probably even 400 between the major metropolitan areas that we have in the state. Yeah. So in other words, when you turn in 46 and you only have 460 appraisers doing your work, that means you turned in 10% of your appraiser population. That's the real numbers behind this. They don't get it. They're just not getting it.
Yeah. You did the math right there. 10% is an insanely high ratio, and that is just a calculation, right? It's not based on quality.
This tipping program, this really is starting to get some people really emotional about it. I mean, you remember Bob Murphy. Bob Murphy used to be with Fannie Mae years and years ago. He took to social media about this tip issue a couple weeks ago. He went on the LinkedIn, and this is what Bob Murphy had to say, because this was in response to appraiser blogs putting out their article on the TIPS program. And Bob Murphy said, now Bob Murphy, highly respected guy, he said on here, as a contributor to the development of the original appraiser quality monitoring at Fannie Mae with a say in what level should or should not be sent, I am disheartened by the current TIPS program. The intent of AQM was to identify patterns in an appraiser's work product. Depending on the egregiousness of the issue, it would be determined what type of letter was sent to the appraiser. I can tell you for a fact that when the program started, a vast majority of appraisers who were sent letters would be very appreciative of the information and corrected their reports going forward. Only the most egregious issues were sent to state boards. The current TIPS program appears to be diametrically opposite to that. It does not appear a pattern has been established, nor has the appraiser apparently give the opportunity to improve their work going forward. One and done is not the way to do it, in my honest opinion. That's Bob Murphy. That's Bob Murphy saying that. So when he started this quote-unquote the appraiser quality monitoring service back when he was with Fannie Mae, he didn't envision anything like what we've got now with this TIPS program.
Right. He's describing it as back in the day as a feedback mechanism to make appraisers better.
Exactly.
And it is now, this current system is just a gotcha and throws an appraiser's livelihood up in the air.
Yeah.
Which is just basically wrong. The idea that these are anonymous, unsigned, it shows that this has nothing to do was trying to help the appraisal community. It's just part of this broader issue of removing appraisers from the valuation process for the GSEs.
It's a setup. That's exactly right. It's just a great, big, huge setup.
I think it is. There's been a lot of other examples of this. Listen, I'm not making this sound like it's a big conspiracy theory.
No.
It's just very basic, objective. When you look at it objectively, why is this happening? This is happening because there's another reason for it. This
right.
is not to make appraisers better. It's just creating havoc within the system for people's livelihoods. How are you going to attract good people to the profession going forward? Well, you're not going to do it by sending random letters that threaten someone's livelihood and don't provide a signature or a person to connect and try to understand what's going on.
That's a perfect segue, Mr. Miller. That's a perfect segue as to what I was going to bring up, because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are part of the ADI, the Appraiser Diversity Initiative. And the big question I've got for Fannie Mae, for Freddie Mac, for the National Urban League and the Appraisal Institute, all members of ADI, is how are you going to bring more diversity into this industry, and how are you going to bring more youth and more ideas into this industry if you make it such a hostile business environment? And that's exactly what they're doing. And I'll tell you right now, the younger generation, the Generation Z, the millennial generation, are going to look at this profession and say, not for me. Not for me. And I'm telling you right now, if this continues, then Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they're not going to want diversity. They're not going to want new blood in the industry. All they're going to want to do is kick people out. That's the way I see it with this TIPS program.
When I step back and look at what is happening and what's happening with this whole idea of appraisal bias, is that Appraisal Foundation has basically paid lip service to this issue. And as a result, the way I look at it is it's a setup. I think of the appraisal community as a significant asset to the bond market and
yes.
to the mortgage market.
Right.
To have a credible resource of trained professionals to do their thing. But, we're an army of lone wolves for the most part, working solo or, very small entities. And we don't really have any protection. We're sort of exposed to risk. And one of the things that's really happened, and something that, I've been talking about for a long time, is with the Appraisal Foundation is, when you have an organization that is 400th out of 400th for diversity, we're literally in 2021, we're 400th out of 400. We were less diverse than farmers and ranchers. It just sets the appraisal industry up for other issues that come up, like what we're seeing now. But the problem with our industry is that with the lack of diversity, that this mentoring system, which was created essentially by the Appraisal Foundation for licensing,
right,
has made us all vulnerable. And I resent that. And this is what I've been really writing quite a bit about over the last couple of years since the pandemic, because the foundation has put us all in this predicament, and it's unfortunate.
Well, they don't want change. I mean, that's just the bottom line. They don't want change. They don't want new ideas. They don't want youth coming in the industry. They don't want the diversity. They don't want it.
The foundation, right now, the foundation, I don't mean to go off on the foundation here, but it's literally a grift. You've got Dave Bunton going to Paris.
I know.
Why is he going to Paris?
Because he was talking about the international valuation standards in Paris. That's what he was doing.
But
Jonathan, that's important. Man, that's important. You got to go to Paris to do that. You got to go there.
Yeah, no, it's a great gig. It's a great gig if you can get it. But seriously, appraisers are paying for that.
I know.
And why? It's a perk in air quotes. It is not doing the industry any favors, and I'd really love that to change.
Well, let's talk about doing the industry some favors. We've got a new CEO over at the Appraisal Institute. We have a new CEO over there. Now, this is good news, I think.
It's great news.
Cindy Chance. Her name is Cindy Chance. She's the last chance for the Appraisal Institute. That's it. This is the last chance they got.
Yeah, so the new CEO is, as you said, Cindy Chance, and she comes from a different industry.
Right.
And she's a go-getter. I've connected with her, spoken with her, and traded emails about what I thought was challenging the organization. I'm very excited for the Appraisal Institute. Certainly, I think some things are going to come out over the next couple of months and into the new year that are going to continue to represent. And I'm not a member. My whole attack dog approach with Jim Amron started back in 2016, and we have the largest trade group in the industry, and they were not thinking about their members' best interests. And I thought it bled into the industry itself, and that's why, I wasn't a member, but I took such a stand on it, and I'm very happy how it turned out, and I hope the same thing happens to the Appraisal Foundation.
Well, let's look at what one thing Cindy has to do, Ms. Chance has to do, is she's got to rally it, and she's got to rally it for the residential appraiser. The more she makes it beneficial to the typical SRA out there, the more people are going to want to join the Appraisal Institute. That's the one thing that Amron and a lot of these guys don't understand, is that you got to do well for your membership so people will want to join your organization. They never saw
Correct.
that under the old group, is what it is. Hopefully they'll see that with Cindy.
Right. The old guard wrote off residential. It was all about commercial.
Yeah,
and,
right.
Everything was just to play, the membership that, hey, we're really, we're working hard for the residential appraisers, but they literally did nothing. And that's a shame.
But Jonathan, here's the thing. Like, they need to be out there right now calling up Fannie Mae and saying, what are you guys doing with this TIP program? It's ridiculous. You're hurting our membership.
Right.
I mean, it needs to be out there. I mean, why is it that Jonathan Miller, you through Housing Notes, and myself through the show, why is it on us to sit there and talk about this very, quote-unquote, uncomfortable topic when we need to say to the GSE out there, knock this off, because you're putting a lot of appraisers in a very bad position. You're putting them into a terrible position that you can't even bring on new appraisers. Sydney Chance in the Appraisal Institute, this is their chance. They got to get out there and get in front of this and start standing up for all appraisers out there, and maybe people will start to join the organization then after that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. One of the things that I wrote about in my Housing Notes a couple of weeks ago was this observation, and it was more about NAR and all the problems that they've been having. But if you think about it, what I wrote about a couple of weeks ago was this idea that whenever there's a controversial issue in the real estate brokerage, I'm just pivoting just for a second to make my point.
Sure.
Whenever there's an issue related to the real estate brokerage world outside of their monthly report releases, like existing home sales and pending home sales and all that sort of stuff, and the economists talking about the housing market based on those results. But I'm talking about just other issues. It's always the Redfins and Zillow, and it was the tech sector of real estate actually that the media could go to speak to issues of the day outside of the stats for their monthly releases.
Right.
And that's exactly what has to happen with the Appraisal Institute. It has to, like you said, this TIPS issue, it has to go out and lead the industry. My impression is this is what's coming.
Yeah, but you need courage with that. You need to have courage. That's the one thing that appraisers don't get. They don't understand. Like a lot of the people that are members of the Appraisal Institute work for the appraisal management companies, which now could end up being junk fees. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But there's too many people they're trying to serve at one time. And the big question is, are you going to serve the residential appraiser, the appraiser that's out there in the field doing it? You got to take a stand. You got to take a stand. Yeah. Who's running this? Who's running this thing?
Phil, that's what leadership is, and that's what has been lacking for 15 years. It was just not good for the membership.
When I was a kid, Dad was an appraiser, and he was an IFA member, and IFA was strong. I mean, they had a lot of numbers of IFA.
I was an IFA member early in my career.
Right, you went IFA as well, so they were strong, and I think a lot of these people out there that are in leadership, they don't want to have more people into it. Here's the dirty little secret, and this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to say it out loud. They don't want to have new blood. They don't want to have diversity because they don't want to have competition. It's as simple and easy as that. These TIPS program that Fannie Mae is putting out right now, they go to regulators who regulate their competitors, which is ridiculous. Right. I mean, you just saw this with the most recent situation with Mike Brunson. Mike Brunson, for those of you that don't know, is an appraiser out of Las Vegas. He got destroyed by his state board a couple of years ago on a ridiculous, ruthless ruling against him. He sued them, and he just won. It was called Brunson versus the NRED. I know Mike Brunson. I know, and he's a warrior.
Right.
And he's a good guy.
Right.
He's not a crook. And the bottom line is the judge ruled that the board gave him a reputational and economic damage from a professional sanction. So when you look at this TIP program here that Fannie Mae is putting out, these appraisers have reputational and economic damages from professional sanctions that are given to them by their competitors in their own state. Now, I'm sorry, but how up is that? I mean, that is a bad situation to be in, Jonathan. It is the way it is.
Yeah.
I'm just calling it like it is. It's ridiculous.
Well, that's actually what happened in West Virginia with
Dean Dawson.
There, the board,
Dean. Oh, gosh, that guy.
Yeah,
Dean Dawson. Oh, God.
The entire board, the vast majority of the board were appraisers.
Right.
And that sounds like, hey, that's good for appraisers. Really, on a real estate board, you should have, one or two appraisers. You need appraisers represented, but you can't have it where they're the majority of the board because they technically are competition, and that's what that guy did to many appraisers.
A lot of appraisers.
A lot of appraisers.
Yeah.
Because they were in, they were direct competition.
Direct competition.
Yeah, I've been appraising since the mid-'80s, and I've always said that appraisers as an industry can be our own worst enemy. Mm-hmm. Example of this board situation in West Virginia, or leadership of the old guard at the Appraisal Institute. Just because they're an appraiser doesn't necessarily mean they're looking out for their colleagues or the membership or whatever.
We got a handful out there that are bad about that, and unfortunately they're the ones that try to get onto these state boards so they can control things, and that's why they don't want to have that competition. Case in point, perfect example. The big huge news story out of South Dakota with the governor's daughter, right, Cassidy Peters. She was trying to get her appraiser's license, Well, she tries to get her appraiser's license. Of course, there's the big, huge kerfuffle. In the state of New York, it takes a little bit of time to get an appraiser approved.
Our state is brutal because it takes, we've had plenty of these problems where we have a trainee that's 2 years ready to take the test to get certified, has all the experience, and it takes the state another year to just respond. This is a tip, a different kind of tip. The appraisal subcommittee, they liaison with the 50 states and 5 territories.
Right.
And if you you have someone that you're trying to get their license or certification, and they've been waiting for months and months and months, not like a month or two, but like 6 months longer, reach out to the appraisal subcommittee. That's what we did. And they called the New York State. And then within a couple of days, our appraiser got a response. That is out there. Like, if you have people that you're trying to get licensed or certified, you have an avenue.
You see, that's a great point, Jonathan, because we don't know that, and the appraisal subcommittee is there to make sure that these states are on top of this stuff. And they got to get more and more. I mean, if we're trying to get these appraisers online, it's going to benefit our business, and we can't wait around for a year, 2 years. But back to Cassidy really quick. Cassidy Peters, she took 2 years just to get the review back. It was Joe Eibach that did the review. He took 12 months to get a standard 3 back. It's not going to work anymore. Wow. And you know what? The other thing that happened in that competition situation was Cassidy was from a small town called Watertown, South Dakota. There's only 5 appraisers in Watertown. One of those appraisers in Watertown is a guy by the name of Brad Johnson. Brad Johnson is an appraiser, but he's also a part-time journalist. So the only time he writes a story is he writes a story bad about her because he decided to become a part-time journalist at that time, right? So, no, he's a direct competitor. And you know what's going to happen? Cassidy was going to get her license. She was going to start a business in Watertown, South Dakota. And then all of a sudden, Brad Johnson's going to be like, well, there's all my bankers and all my lawyers and everybody else. They're going to like her better, and they're going to try to cut off their Johnson.
I said cut off your Johnson.
It's time to cut off the Johnson.
I said cut off your Johnson.
That's what he was worried about. He's worried about cutting off the Johnson. Between the professional vasectomies and the cutting off of the Johnsons, we got to work these things out, Jonathan. We got to work them out.
Yeah. No, I'm sort of damned if I respond to that. So I'll just
let's move on. I tell you what, let's move on to a different topic. You want to?
Sure.
And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue this conversation with Jonathan Miller tomorrow. That'll be show number 2 because we got so much to cover.
He had so much.
We got so much, and it's going to get even better. You got to listen all the way through tomorrow's show. Okay, I'm just saying it right now. Listen all the way through it because Jonathan and I, we're just dropping truth bombs. We're dropping truth bombs. It's time for things to change. It's time for this profession to get some leadership. Cindy Chance, let's give her a chance. She's the last chance. She's the last chance. The appraisal Institute do something right for the first time ever in a long time. So let's see what we got going on. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our show, and as always, I would like to thank you for listening. As we journey through the mysteries and complexities that are, in fact, the real estate appraisal business, I would like to thank my producer, Kevin Kinney, and our guest, Jonathan Miller, for being here for his thoughtful insight and knowledge, God willing. We will be back here tomorrow, remember that. So in the meantime, you kiss your spouse, you hug your children, enjoy your day. Be safe in the field. You've been listening to Phil Crawford on Voice of Appraisal. We'll talk very soon.